Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is the next installment in the incredible series by Jack LaFountain. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear and DMT's Cryptid Crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Death Rides the Red. Let's get straight into that. That evening, Jason left the sheriff's office after he spelled Sam for supper. It was Sam's turn for the night watch. Jason was feeling a bit used up. His first stop was the Lone Star for a shot of the hair of the dog. It had been a long day and there was much left to do. Bill Reed, Texoma's blacksmith, waved Jason over to join him at the bar. "How many of them are in town right now?" Jason asked. "Dang near all of them, except that Hargis fella and the house negro." "Good. Then everything's working as planned." Jason downed his drink. "See you at Colbert's." He left Reed holding down the bar and hurried to his horse tied outside. And Jason swung into the saddle and rode north out of Texoma, headed for Colbert's ferry. Over the next hour, the scene of the Lone Star was repeated a dozen times as men left their homes and businesses to consult with Bill Reed at the Lone Star before gathering on the banks of the Red River. A fat orange moon climbed over the treetops that surrounded the ferry and looked down on the men in long white robes. Jason got the men mounted and started them west at a walk. "Keep close together and keep it quiet," Jason ordered. "I want to be on top of them before they even know we're there." Now, Jason Conroy was determined to find out what John Hotchkiss was doing in that barn down by the river. He was sure there was a connection between the barn and the murders. The law and Sam Bryan wouldn't allow him to search the place without Hotchkiss's permission, and Hotchkiss wasn't about to let anyone go poking around his place. That wasn't good enough for Jason. He was more than willing to tiptoe around the law if there was one chance in hell of ending John Hotchkiss's political career. Texas had been forced to comply with a Republican Reconstruction in order to be readmitted to the Union, and their rules were a constant source of irritation for Jason. And he remembered how Lincoln and those same Republicans once spouted off about how it was impossible for Texas to leave their Union. Now, they had all kinds of conditions for re-entry to the inadvisable Union that Texas never left. He intended to see that every carpetbagger and Union lackey like John Hotchkiss paid dearly for their hypocrisy. An hour later, the robed riders sat atop the same hill from which Jack Morgan and Nick Corbin watched their work crew fall in trees the day before. A circle of tents ringed a large fire below them. The only man in sight was a short black man, dressed in overalls, tending the fire. And Jason and his men watched as he rose from his seat to throw on another log. And Jason drew the men in close. "We'll run the crew off and get a look in that barn. That's it. No one gets hurt. Y'all got that?" Jason said. What if they start shooting?" a voice from behind Jason asked. "What if one of them Negroes pulls a gun? We'll kill every damn one of them. That's what," Bill Reed said. "Enough of that," Jason snapped. "There's to be no shooting to harm anyone. If we go in fast, they're going to break and run. Just scare them off. That's how we want." A scream rolled up the hill towards the mounted men. "Jason, look!" Enos Shea pointed to the camp. The black man was backing away from the fire, pursued by a tall, shadowy figure with misshapen legs. The thing jumped over the fire and lifted a screaming sentry off his feet. "What in the hell is that thing?" Reed asked. The question went unanswered. The stunned Klansman watched in horror as the creature snapped the sentry's head back and tossed the lifeless body onto the fire. The creature pulled the tent nearest to the fire from its anchors and howled in triumph. The exposed, Frightened workers inside the tent scrambled to their feet and joined those pouring from the other tents in sprinting for their lives. Chaos engulfed the camp. Terrified workmen stumbled over one another, not knowing where to go, and they fled in every direction. The creature plunged into the midst of the panic and cut the men down with swift, massive blows from clawed hands. A blood-laden mist filled the air, and some of the workers died instantly. The unlucky survivors rolled on the blood-soaked ground, screaming until, one by one, the creature finished them off. A few of the fastest workmen, they reached the edge of the woods where gunfire erupted from the trees and cut them down. And two of the hapless workers fled north towards the river and into the arms of the waiting clansmen. "Bill, go get one of them," Jason said. Bill Reed rode out to meet the escaping men. They saw Bill's white robe and halted. Indecision froze them between the monster behind them and the one in front of them. Gunshots rang out from every direction of the camp, and their decision was made. Death before and behind, they turned west, running a gauntlet between the two dangers. They didn't get far. A bullet slammed into one of the fleeing men's chest and exited in an explosion of blood. A second round knocked Bill Reed from his saddle. His limp body hit a dull thud. The remaining workmen reversed direction once more, only to be cut down by gunfire. The tables turned. The clansmen's appetite for a raid and terror evaporated. They broke ranks and spurred their horses towards the supposed safety of Colbert's Ferry. And Jason ignored the flights of the others. He rode down the slope towards the carnage and his fallen comrade. Bill had not moved since falling from his horse, and Jason knew he was dead, but could not leave his fallen man. He reined in beside Bill's body. He didn't need to dismount. The shot that took Bill down had carried away the left side of Bill's head. A bullet tugged at Jason's robe and another lifted his hat from his head. Jason wheeled his horse around and joined the others in retreat, while the sounds of slaughter echoed in his ears. Jason arrived back in town before the sun, and Sam was still in his bunk, but sat up as Jason came through the door. "You're a little early this morning, ain't you?" Sam asked. "Couldn't sleep." Jason shook the empty coffee pot. Jason's bloodshot eyes and terse manner told Sam his deputy probably had not slept at all. "Well, if you insist on waking me up, make yourself useful and get some coffee going in that pot," Sam told him. Sam lay back down on his bunk while Jason busied himself making coffee. Jason coaxed the embers in the stove back to life and threw in a couple of sticks of wood. And while he let the fire build and heat up the stove, he went out back to the well. And soon, the aroma of brewing coffee filled the office and drew Sam from his bunk. Sam strapped on his gun belt and retrieved his hat as he ambled into position behind his desk. And Jason poured coffee for them both. Sam sat back and sipped his coffee and waited. Jason was not given in to insomnia. Something had robbed him of his sleep, and Sam knew sooner or later he would crack. Sam finished his second cup and decided to try a different approach to get to sooner. "Well, I'd say we go to my place and get Ellie to fix us some breakfast," Sam asked. "You go, Sam. I'm not hungry." "Okay, Jason, out with it. I might believe you couldn't sleep, but you never turned down Ellie's cooking. What's the matter?" And before Jason could answer, hoofbeats turned to boot heels pounding the steps outside. And Amos Hargos swung open a door, and in stalked angry John Hotchkiss. "Sheriff, I have an entire wagon load of dead bodies coming into town," Hotchkiss began. "Every one of them has been ripped apart. I think it's about time you earned your pay and put a stop to the attacks against my family and property." "You hold it right there." Sam was on his feet. "I'll do my duty. You can take that to the bank. You can also count on me doing it the way I see it. My duty does not include pleasing the likes of you. I'll be damned if I'm going to go flying off half-cooked on your say-so. I deal with facts, Congressman. Until I have some hard facts telling me who's responsible, I'm not going to do a damn thing." "Well, Sheriff," Hotchkiss shot back, I've got your facts for you this time. This fact is wearing a white robe and pointy little hood. The Ku Klux rode through my place last night. The crew managed to get one of them before his partners massacred those defenseless Negroes who work for me. Well, if they killed a Klansman, I'm supposing they weren't exactly defenseless, Sam said. But, well, let's take a look. The wagon will be here shortly, Hotchkiss said. Mr. Hargis and I rode on ahead. All right then. While we're waiting, suppose you tell me what you know about what happened. Since our arrival at the Rockin' H, Mr. Hargis has mounted guards on duty day and night. Last night, one of the guards reported gunfire down by the river. We rode up and found the camp ransacked. All the Negro workers were dead. Some were torn to pieces, but a few had been shot. Now among the dead, we found Bill Reed and his clan's get-up. My men tried to track the raiders, but it was too dark to follow them very far. I can tell you this, they rode out to the west. I believe that was also the case in my father's murder, was it not? In any case, I sent Mr. Hargis to investigate. He found 2 ex-Confederates who are under suspicion for similar murders, hiding out with Nate Carson on the Lazy L. Sam, no more dallying. I want the Texas Rangers called in on this. I've been in touch with the Governor Davis and he agrees. He has a detachment of Texas Rangers standing by. I can handle this without interference from you, the Governor or the Texas Rangers. Sam, you are a good man. Father thought the world of you, but the Klan is everywhere. You are in over your head and outside help at exactly what's called for. This outrage requires the full weight of the government be brought to bear. Now, you can wire Governor Davis to send the Rangers or I will. It's as simple as that. But one way or another, they are coming. Wagons here, Hargis said from the doorway. The 4 men stepped out onto the Texoma's main street. There's no wagon, Sam said. Look again, Hargis answered. Sam glanced westward a second time and saw Hotchkiss's Negro driver swing his team onto Texoma's main street. As the wagon grew closer, Sam could see the bodies piled in the back. Hotchkiss was telling the truth. Dismembered Negroes filled the wagon. On top of them lay a white-robed body. Sam pulled back the hood, and half the man's head was gone, but it was Bill Reed. Sam noticed Jason remained on the porch the entire time. I guess he's seen enough of this, Sam thought. You see, Sheriff, Hotchkiss said, this is out of hand. We got to have a show of force to put an end to this slaughter of innocent freed men. Washington is not going to stand for any more interference from rebels holding local office or hiding in white robes. You mean like me? Sam glared at the congressman. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll think it over. In the meanwhile, you'll have to tend to burying the bodies. Jeremy Wentworth is dead. The Undertaker? Dead? Where? How? What happened? Hotchkiss asked. My deputy found him out by the Lazy Owl. He'd been gunshot and left for dead. What more do you need? Carson's obviously the ringleader. Let's get to the Rangers and get down there. I said I'll think about it, and that's all I'm going to do for the moment. Sam, I hate to do this, Hotchkiss said. But you leave me no choice. You have until noon tomorrow, and if you don't call for the Rangers by then, I will. Governor Davis has agreed to send them on my say-so. He made a commitment to Washington to end the violence in Texas aimed at loyal Americans, both black and white. No pissant local sheriff is going to stand in the way. So, take your time, Sam. Just don't take too much of it. Noon, Sam, and that's it. Sam Bryan turned his back on the congressman and started for his office without a word. Noon, Sam, Hotchkiss called after him. Not a minute longer. Sam and Jason disappeared inside, leaving Hotchkiss and his men standing in the street. "Get them buried. Amon, put that Ku Kluxer in with the Negroes, and let everybody see you do it. That might flush the rest of them out."
"Sure thing. And the sheriff?"
"Well, we'll give him until noon, like I said, and then send a wire and let the Rangers do their dirty work. I'll meet you back at the Rocking Age. Oh, and while you are in town, have Humphreys hire a new work gang." Now, Nate and Jimmy spent the day following Wentworth's death, making preparations for an assault on the Lazy L. They made sure the horses were secure in the barn and well fed. Jimmy brought in a supply of food, water, and wood for the stove. Nate cleared around each window and stacked arms and ammunition at each post. Jack placed a box of cartridges on the table.
"I don't think we'll see Harmon again tonight, but just in case,"
he said with a nod towards the box. Nate picked up the box and looked it over. "What's so special about these?" he asked. Take a look inside," Jack said.
"What is it?"
Nate asked, holding one of the shining cartridges up to the light. "Silver. Well, silver-plated," Nick said. "Silver bullets?" Jimmy asked. "Yep," Jack answered. "Silver's the only thing that would kill a werewolf."
"Your bayonets, they sparkled in the moonlight,"
Nate remembered. Silver," Nick said. "So that's why Harmon got up after I put my bayonet hilt deep in his chest?" Nate asked. "Exactly," Jack nodded. The excitement generated by a wagon full of bodies and a mass burial in Texoma failed to reach the quiet of the Lazy L. Nate's day passed in uneventful peace. The men inside the ranch house knew the quiet wouldn't last long, and their dread of sundown was answered soon enough. Nate cocked a practiced ear towards the window. "We got company," he said. Each of the incoming riders carried a torch held high above his head, producing a bobbing line of flames and weaving a path to Nate's door. "Not afraid of being spotted, are they?" Jack said. "No, I reckon not," Nate replied. And the riders circled the house before raining in outside the front door.
Nate Carson, come on out. We mean you no harm,"
a masked rider called out. The voice sounded vaguely familiar. Nate couldn't quite put a face to it, but it had been someone from town. And through the front window, Nate could see a dozen white-robed riders. They weren't brandishing weapons, but there was no question of their being well armed.
Well, it's the Knights of the White Camellia,"
Nick whispered.
"The Ku Klux Klan."
"Jack and I have had the pleasure once before," Nate said. "I heard rumors that they were around these parts, and I have never actually seen any of them until now." "These boys ain't working for Hotchkiss, that's for sure," Nick said. "Nate, see what they want, and we'll cover you," Jack added.
"I'm coming out,"
Nate announced. He stepped onto the porch, hands on his coat. "What can I do for you, boys?"
"Relax your grip on that coat for starters. We're just passing through.
This call is all about what we're going to do for you." And what would that be?"
"That lying, thieving, carpetbagger John Hotchkiss went to see Sheriff Bryan earlier today. He's claiming you and your rebel buddies in there butchered his Negro work gang down by the river last night. We know it wasn't you. We were there, but we didn't do any of the killing. We think it was Hotchkiss himself that had those boys shot down. Never mind the facts. Hotchkiss is saying y'all are Klan and demanding a sheriff send for the Rangers just to bring y'all in and hang nice and proper."
"So, why are y'all here?" Nate asked. "I thought lynching was your thing. You plan to lynch before they get here?" But the question drew laughs from the riders.
"Nah, Carson. We thought of asking y'all to join us, but we ain't never thought of lynching you. John and Henry Hotchkiss were our friends. We know that low-life son of John's murdered them both, just like he killed his own work crew. We want him dead or at least behind bars." Why don't you just go to the sheriff then? Nate asked. Because we don't want to have to explain to the sheriff what we're doing at that Negro work camp on the Rocking Age when the whole crew was killed. Besides, he'd think we were crazy if we told him what we saw. Hell, we ain't so sure ourselves. Now, if you don't mind, we're going to ride across your place. The sheriff and Hotchkiss could come riding up that road any time. We don't want to explain to him why we're here, either. But the clansmen wheeled their horses and rode on out. Know any of those fellas? Jack asked. Probably. I can't quite put a face with the leader's voice, but I will, Nate said. I reckon the question is, do we trust them? Why not? The snake knows best where all the rats are hiding. It's likely their information's good, even if they are up to mischief. Looks like Hotchkiss has got us cornered. He'll just add Nate and Jimmy to the conspiracy and hang us all, Nick added. Maybe, but I doubt he'll make a move tonight. I say we have until dawn. He'll try and take us before the Rangers get here, though. That way, the fight's already going and the Rangers will step in without knowing anything except what Hotchkiss wants them to know. We either surrender to the Rangers or hang, or they'll kill us here. It looks like we're going to need some help to get out of this one. What do you think, Nick? I think I can get to that telegraph line and back by dawn without them knowing, Nick offered. What about Harmon? Nate asked. I don't think we'll see him again tonight. He's been on a tear. The damage is done and Hotchkiss has hauled him in, Nick answered. So, who are we telegraphing? I hope it's not Pinkerton, Nate said. No, Pinkerton is in Hotchkiss's pocket. Besides, he never was very good about sizing up the opposition, Nick said. Actually, Nate, we're only sort of here alone. We have backup, strictly for emergencies. I say that this qualifies, Jimmy said. Is it going to be enough to trump the Texas Rangers in a fight over who killed the family of a Republican congressman? Nate asked. Only if we're still alive when they get here, Jack said. Otherwise, they never heard of us. Jimmy let go a slow whistle. That's some powerful help, he said. Yeah, but we got to hold out until they get here, Nick cautioned. Nick Corbin slipped through the darkness with a practiced skill that made him no more than a silent moon shadow. He spent a good deal of his adult life moving around at night. He avoided looking towards the barn as he passed. He didn't need any further reminders of what might be lurking in the dark with him. Stopping at odd intervals, he checked his back trail as carefully as the way ahead. Nick quickly covered a half-mile to the river. In the dim moonlight, he spotted a silhouette just upstream of his position and changed course to investigate. Keeping to the shadows, Nick circled the object to approach against the breeze. It was a crude lean-to and the remnants of a burned-out cooking fire. Somebody left in a hurry. Pans and plates were littered all over the small camp by the varmints that moved in after the camp was abandoned. This was Rafael's fishing hole. Nate was right on the money. Rafael came back to the Lazy L because he heard gunfire, and it cost him his life. Nick found Rafael's skiff at the water's edge and gave silent thanks. He pushed it out into the river and hopped aboard to let the current carry him towards Colbert's ferry and the telegraph line. He rowed low in that little boat, keeping out of sight, and the water lapped against the sides of the skiff as he glided down the river. The night was alive with the songs of creepers and crickets. Along the banks, unseen creatures large and small splashed into the safety of the water as Nick floated by. A large black snake cut a crooked path across the moon reflected on the river's surface. Nick caught the sound of a pack of coyotes as they ran along the north bank, barking their short, high-pitched yips. An owl winged overhead on his way across the river, but no human sounds reached Nick's ears.
Nick pulled into the shore on the north bank about a quarter-mile west of the ferry. It took him a few minutes to orientate himself, but he managed to find the telegraph wire in the darkness. He dropped the saddlebag from his shoulder and pulled out the equipment he would need. A set of spikes that tied around his boots, a long leather strap, and the telegraph key. He put the spikes on his boots, wrapped the strap around the pole, and started up the pole. It was a bit chancy balancing at the top, but he got the key in place and tapped out his message. Anticipate our arrest by locals. Harmon located in Texoma. Request immediate aid. Lazy L Ranch. Corbin. Now back on the ground again, Nick returned the equipment to his saddlebag, and getting back would not be an easy as the trip downstream had been. Nick jogged back to the skiff and paddled across the river to the south shore. He pulled Raffa's skiff onto the sandy bank of the river edge and scrambled up the bank onto firmer ground. Nick started west at an easy lope. He had 4 miles to cover before it got light. We better try and get some sleep. I'll take first watch, Jack offered. Nate and Jimmy stretched out on their bunks while Jack busied himself making coffee. The night was half gone, but what remained had all the makings of a long wait. Nate was sure sleep would elude him, but was soon drifting down into darkness. As he dropped over the edge into sleep, he heard a voice call his name, and the speaker's face swarm into focus. Nate bolted awake again, and he found Jack looking at him intently. I know who that Klansman was, he started. It was Jason Conroe. The name failed to register with Jack. Sam Bryan's deputy. Do you think Bryan knows about his deputy's nighttime activities? Jack asked. I doubt it, Nate said. Sam's not the sort to hide behind a sheet. That explains how the clan knew what was going on in the sheriff's office. Was Conroe blowing smoke about the clan's plans to attack that work gang? Maybe not. Either way, Bryan's got to know Hotchkiss is playing him and Sam Bryan. I know doesn't like being played. Then we might have an ally, Jack brightened. Looks like it. But this warning might be all the help you can give us for now. There's just one way to find out for sure. You going to see him. What good would that do? Whatever Bryan knows or doesn't know, this is out of our hands now. If Hotchkiss thinks the sheriff is safely in his pocket, he might let down his guard. We can get Sam to help us outflank him. Okay, but we're spreading our forces mighty thin. We've done that before. It worked out pretty well, as I remember, Nate reminded him. Chancellorsville? Yeah, I guess you're right. You just watch your back. Remember what happened to Stonewall. Hotchkiss is bound to have at least one set of eyes on us already. Nate saddled Lil Joe and cut southeast over Lazy L until he struck the Texoma Fork near the boundary with a Rockin' H. It was familiar ground and Lil Joe moved easily along despite the dark. And once on the road, Nate picked up the pace, and a shadow. A lone rider entered the road near the Rockin' H and trailed Nate to town. Nate saw a light burning in the sheriff's window and thought it was turning out to be a sleepless night for everyone. He walked Little Joe around the back of the building and tied him next to Bryan's bay. A man could get shot slipping in Sam Bryan's back door unannounced in the wee hours of the morning. Nate returned to the front door and knocked. No one answered, but the knob gently turned in Nate's hand and Sam Bryan opened the door. Been expecting you, Sam said and ushered Nate inside. Then you sent Jason to pay me a call earlier tonight? I'm afraid not. I haven't seen Jason since supper. Well, he and some of his friends were out of my place a while ago. I thought he might have come back here. Do tell? Yep, I do, and he was dressed mighty odd for a deputy. How's that? A white robe, face covered up. That is mighty strange. How can you be sure it was Jason? Oh, I'm sure. Are you running with that bunch now, Sam?
How about I keep you guessing? Whatever the case may be, there ain't much I can do at this point. Hotchkiss will have the Rangers on the way here come noon.
You're the sheriff, for God's sake, Sam. You know I'm not involved in John's murder, and neither are Jack and Nick. They trailed the real killer here to Texoma.
Now you have my attention. Who killed John Hotchkiss?
The same person who killed Raphael Berry.
What? Raphael's dead? When?
Yeah, it happened the same night. Jason showed up with Jeremy Wentworth slung over his saddle. The killer is Hotchkiss's man, Eamon Hargis. Except Hargis isn't his real name. His real name is Harmon, and as long as I'm telling it all, he ain't exactly a man either.
Nate said.
Nate shook his head before Sam could speak. Let me finish, Sam. This Hargis, or Harmon, whatever you want to call him, he's something called a werewolf. He looks like a man during the day, but at night he turns into a cross between a man and a wolf. Somehow the army made him that way. They turned him into a monster and turned him loose in the enemy lines at night. He butchered the pickets and whomever else he came upon. He'd rip them to pieces, just like he did to John. Just like Raphael. Hotchkiss learned about it in Washington. Somehow he found this Harmon and is using him to do the same thing here. If you don't believe me, check with Jason.
What's Jason got to do with this? Sam asked.
His bunch was on the Rockin' H and saw Hotchkiss's work gang killed. He may not know what to call what he saw, but it was a werewolf. It was Hargis.
Wow, that's interesting because Hotchkiss claims that slaughter was the handiwork of you and your house guests. He says y'all got all dressed up and killed his crew. His men brought in the body of Bill Reed and in his robe as proof. I'm sure Hotchkiss will say you killed Raphael too, just to keep him quiet. Hotchkiss already has you pegged as the head of the local clan.
Sam, that's a damn lie. I've never had a thing to do with the clan. As for Jack Morgan and Nick Corbin, they could never be clan.
And why is that?
Because they're Chickasaw and half-breeds at that, and they were with Jimmy and me when Raphael was killed. They tracked Harmon here from Whitesboro. He's wanted by the War Department.
No, he's not, John Hotchkiss announced from the doorway. Eamon Hargis is a honorable, pardoned veteran serving his country and my employee. He runs a private security company and has passed a congressional review. Let me clear things up for you, Sam. First, allow me to introduce Mr. Jordan Teague. He works for the Pinkerton Detective Agency and is assigned to the War Department.
And Teague and Hotchkiss stepped into the office. Nate's one-time shadow and another of Hotchkiss's security men filled the vacated place in the doorway. Mr. Carson, Sheriff, Teague began with a nod towards each man. Jack Morgan and Nick Corbin are former employees of the Pinkerton Agency. I know them well and they are wanted men. I have federal and state warrants for their arrest. And Teague handed the warrants to Sam. Sam glanced at the papers in his hand and nodded to Nate. As you can see, they are wanted for contempt of Congress and murder in several of the southern states, including Texas. It's your duty, Sheriff, to help me arrest these men. He's telling the truth, Nate, Sam said. Mr. Carson, Teague continued, should you continue to hide these fugitives, you will be arrested as an accomplice. I'll see to that personally. Why, Mr. Teague, Jack and Nick aren't hiding. They're at the Lazy L right now. Why don't you ride out and arrest them? Nate replied. Come dawn, we intend to do just that, Teague said. Then, best of luck to you, sir. Nate looked over at Teague in his expensive eastern suit and smiled. You're damn near sure gonna need it. As for me, I've honored my parole and intend to honor it until I die. But I'm warning you now, I'll kill any Yankee son of a bitch that rides armed onto my place. Jordan Teague stepped slowly away from Nate's glare and tightly clenched fists. Hotchkiss stepped into the space that opened between the two men.
Sheriff, I want Mr. Carson placed under arrest, he demanded.
On what charge? He hasn't done anything illegal.
Mr. Teague is an agent of the United States government doing his sworn duty. And since I intend to lead the arrest party, he's just threatened the life of a U.S. congressman. And that violates his oath of allegiance.
So you say. I've taken the same oath and I'm afraid I couldn't quite make out the threat, Congressman. Sam smiled.
Then perhaps you'll understand this.
Hotchkiss stepped back into the doorway as his men pushed by him with guns drawn.
Kill them both,
Hotchkiss ordered. Hotchkiss' men were fast, real fast. However, they chose to ignore the rancher and go for the lawman. That was a fatal mistake. Guns exploded in the tiny office and filling the air with blue smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. A bullet torn through Jordan Teague's chest. The Pinkerton man was thrown against the wall and slid to the floor in a trail of blood before he got a shot off. And Sam Bryan did better than Teague. He cleared leather, but the .45 slug from his gun dug into the floor at his feet. A bullet churned through his guts and drove him back against his desk. He rolled to the floor as Nate painted the walls of the Texoma Sheriff's office with the brains of Hotchkiss's men. At Nate's feet, Sam Bryan groaned in pain. Nate dropped to Sam's side. The wounded sheriff did his best to hold the wound closed, but blood poured from between his fingers and pooled on the floor around him. Nate could see he wasn't going to last long for this world.
Get out!
Sam strained through clenched teeth.
Get out of here!
Lights came on all along Main Street, and people were coming.
Get out!
Sam repeated and lost consciousness. Nate looked out the office door. Hotchkiss was across the street, waving his men and growing a crowd towards the sheriff's office. A slug slammed into the wall above Nate's head. Nate hit the back door on the run. He made for Lil Joe. The office full of dead bodies slowed the onlookers long enough for Nate to climb aboard the big horse and spur for the Lazy L.
It's Nate Carson. He killed the sheriff,
Hotchkiss called to the crowd.
Let's get him.
Jack maintained a nodding vigil by the light of a single dim lamp. Jimmy emerged from his room an hour before dawn and busied himself making coffee. Jack told him of Nate's discovery and his errand to see the sheriff.
Sit tight, kid. I'm going to the barn for some tools before it gets light,
Jack said. He returned with a saw, drill, a wood chisel, and a hammer.
What y'all going to do with that stuff?
Jimmy asked. I'm going to cut a hole in the floor and make us another way out, just in case.
No need, Jack. We have one already.
You do?
Hell yeah. This is North Texas. Between raiding Comanches and Twisters, everybody's got a hideout. Captain built us one right under the house. Help me move this table.
When the two slid the table to one side of the room and threw back the rug to reveal a door cut into the floor. Can you get outside from here? Jack wanted to know.
Nope, just into the cellar.
Jimmy opened the door and Jack peered through. The door opened onto an open space between the floor and a second door set into the ground. The cellar didn't interest Jack, but the crawl space did. Jack walked to the barn and returned with an armload of tools. He disappeared into the crawl space and yelled up to Jimmy.
Hammer the toes, kid,
and go keep a watch while I make us a new door. Jimmy handed the tools down the hole one by one, and Jack pushed him ahead of him as he crawled to the north wall. He drilled 3 holes through the wall and knocked out the area between them with a chisel. It made an opening just large enough for the saw, and Jack quickly cut a square just wider than his shoulders. He pushed open a new door in time to see the first grey streaks of morning light in the sky. Jack replaced the wood and propped it in place with a hammer. It was a crude door and not very well concealed from the outside, but it would have to do. Jack returned to the house, drawn by the welcoming aroma of frying bacon. That bacon ought to bring Nick running. I hope Nate fares as well with the sheriff. Captain will be here, Jimmy assured him. Nick made good time covering the ground back to the Lazy L, and he paused near Rafael's fishing spot to catch his breath. It wouldn't do to let Jack see him huffing and puffing like a locomotive. The sky was growing light in the east, and Nick had half-mile yet to go. Lord willing, he'd be there before the sun was up. Nick was certain he had not been seen. He wished he was as sure that help would arrive on time. Their contact was supposed to be at Good Springs yesterday. Still, even if the message got through, as the local Indian agent promised, the army could be unreliable. The chain had more than one weak link, not a good thing for a lifeline. The sun had just peeked over the horizon as Nick set out, at an easy, loping pace. Soon, the Lazy L was in view. A distinctive set of footprints crossed his path and Nick bent to study them. The tracks, well, they were familiar, but there was an unexpected twist. Nick pushed back his hat and scratched his head as he studied the tracks. He must have lost a toe since Whitesboro. How can that be? Nick said aloud. And the wind that whispered past his ear had no answer, and Nick stopped at the barn to check on Rafael's body. The body remained undisturbed, and the breeze that had no answers to Nick's questions only moments before now carried the intoxicating scent of frying bacon. Nick licked his lips and ran for the ranch house. Sam Bryan groaned when Jason Conroe and Bill Simpson lifted him from the ground. "God almighty, he's alive!" Jason yelled. "Somebody, go get Doc Ives." "No, take him home," Ellie Bryan demanded. The deputies looked at her, glanced at Hotchkiss, and back to Ellen Bryan. Ellie caught the look. "Jason Conroe, you take my husband home this minute or there's going to be hell to pay. Do you understand me?" Without waiting for a reply, a determined Ellie rounded on John Hotchkiss. "That's for you, John Hotchkiss. If you want to give orders, go back to Washington, where you belong." It was going to take more than a Republican congressman shouting orders to convince Sam Bryan's deputies to defy an angry Ellie Bryan. Using a blanket from an empty cell as a stretcher, they carried the wounded sheriff home and laid him in his own bed. "Follow them," Hotchkiss hissed at Eamon Hargis. "He must not talk. Do what you have to do. You understand?" And Hargis nodded and set off to lend a hand with Sam Bryan. Doc Ives arrived minutes behind the wounded man and pushed through the gathering crowd outside. The crowd inside was growing as well. Ives and Ellie Bryan quickly tired of the spectators and cleared the room of all but Hargis and Jason Conroe. They refused to leave the sheriff and insisted on being witnesses to anything he might say. Doc Ives pulled back the blanket that covered Sam Bryan's body, and blood completely covered the front of his shirt, and a dark hole just below the sweep of his ribs continued to ooze. And gently, almost delicately, the doctor opened Sam's shirt. A quick glance was all he needed, and he replaced the shirt and blanket, turned to Ellie, and then shook his head. Ellie fell to the bed beside her husband and cradled his head against her shoulder. As she wept, Ellie's long auburn hair fell across their faces. She drew Sam close and stroked his face. "Don't move," he whispered in her ear. "Don't say a word or let on that you hear." Ellie gasped at the sound of Sam's voice. Realizing his intent, she feigned a renewed crying spell. "Good girl," Sam whispered. "Nate Carson, he didn't do it. Hotchkiss did. Tell Jason, I love you, Ellie." And Sam Bryan sighed, exhaled a long, slow breath, and left her for another world. Ellie's tears returned in earnest, and when her tears subsided, Jason Conroe led her away to another room. Doc Ives looked into Sam's lifeless eyes and listened for any sounds of breathing before allowing the men to carry Sam's body to Wentworth's. Jimmy put the heaping plates of bacon and biscuits on the table as Jack emerged from the hole in the floor. Jack brushed the dirt from his shirt and pants, closed the door, and threw the rug back over it. Jimmy helped him lift the table back into place, being careful not to spill their breakfast. Jack noticed the waiting feast was set for 4. He looked at Jimmy and smiled at the kid's optimism. You're gonna make somebody a great wife one of these days, Jack laughed. Jimmy's face flushed, and Jack was unsure if it was embarrassment or anger. He quickly changed the subject. Here, he said. I made you something last night. Jack placed a half-dozen shotgun shells on the table, and Jimmy gathered them up and gave a quizzical look. Double-arced silver shot, like my cartridges, Jack explained. Gotta be silver to kill a werewolf. A huge smile lit Jimmy's face. That this tough old soldier had accepted him as an equal, it swelled his heart with a warmth that pushed fear aside. Thanks, Jack. For everything. Nah, Jimmy, you're a good man. I just want you to know that. Things are apt to get pretty wild around here soon. There probably won't be time to tell you that later, but I trust you'd watch my back in a fight any day. And you're one hell of a cook. Jimmy broke open his shotgun and pulled out the shells. He dropped 2 of the new silver loads into the breech, when a high-pitched, quavering wow split the quiet morning air. Jimmy jumped and lost his hold on the shotgun. It bounced off the floor, and the slug spilled out and rolled free. Jimmy dropped to his knees in pursuit of the weapon and the rolling shells. As he chased him in a mad scramble across the floor, Jack stepped around Jimmy and threw open the front door. Nick Corbin, still raising the rebel yell, entered on the run. Nick collided with Jimmy. The pair bounced across the plank floor, and Jack closed the door behind them and exploded with laughter while Nick and Jimmy struggled desperately to untangle their limbs. They managed with great effort to regain their feet. Laughing and holding his aching side, Jack slid to the floor, unable to stop his wild laughter or tears running down his cheeks. Nick and Jimmy tried to resist Jack's uncontrolled mirth, but they couldn't find the strength. They surrendered to the urge to join the laughter. None of the men saw the somber figure that stepped into the room behind them. I'm glad y'all are having so much fun, Nate said. His surprised return and sober face broke the mood, and the laughter ceased. Nick helped Jack back to his feet, and Jimmy retrieved his shotgun and scattered ammunition. I take it your visit with the sheriff went badly, Jack said. To say the least, Sam Bryan is dead. Nate had their attention. What happened? Sam knew about the clan's involvement in the killing of the work crew. He wasn't overly surprised that his deputy was involved, but didn't admit to it. Hotchkiss was forcing him to call in the Rangers. While I was talking to Sam, Hotchkiss showed up with 2 gunmen and a Pinkerton man named Jordan Teague in tow. Teague's an ass, Nick interrupted. That may be, Nate continued. But he had a warrant for your arrest, and Hotchkiss threatened to have me arrested as your accomplice. I invited them to try and serve that warrant here. That kind of put up a fight in Teague. When he hesitated to think it over, Hotchkiss ordered his boys to start shooting. They damn near killed Sam before I got to them. Dang, they must have been fast, Jack said. They were fast, that's for sure. But poor judges. It cost them. Hotchkiss called out the rest of his men and was busy stirring up the town for my hanging, and so I lit out. I reckon a posse will be here soon, and the Rangers, they'll be right behind them. The bodies were beginning to pile up at Werewolf's. Jason had the men lay Sam Bryan beside the Undertaker's body. Bill Reed's family put a stop to Hotchkiss's scheme to bury Bill in a mass grave, and Bill was still lying in the workroom when Sam arrived. This is getting to be the busiest place in town, Chet Ferguson said. Let's just get the hell out of here. Gives me the creeps, Terrell Jolly replied. And that smell is god-awful. Ain't nobody in here going to bother you, Terrell. It's them outside you gotta worry about, Chet said. Despite Ferguson's bravado, none of the men carrying Sam Bryan's body cared to tally along. Their duty done, they beat a hasty retreat to the Lone Star. Doc, can you take care of seeing to it that Sam and the rest are buried? Looks like I'm gonna be real busy, Jason said. Sure thing, son. Leave me a couple of men to do the digging. Yo, Doc ain't what he used to be. I'll take care of everything. You get to the worthless vermin that killed Sam. Good you looking on Miss Bryan, too? I'll stop by there later, in the morning. Ellie's a strong girl. She'll be alright until then. She probably wants to be alone for a bit, Jason said. Tomorrow will be fine. Tell her I'll be by when things quiet down. I might. What about you? Where are you headed, Deputy? Hargus asked. The Lazy L. I want to make sure Nate and the rest are still there. Then I'm going to set up watch at the fort on his place. I want to make sure nobody slips off the Lazy L into Indian territory. Good idea. I'll be sure to tell the congressman what a help you've been. Hargus added. Save it. I'm just doing my job like Sam would have wanted me to do. I'll tell him anyway. Now, I've got a job to do myself. Eamon Hargus left Wentworth's in a hurry. Time was slipping away and he still had one more stop to make before getting back to Hotchkiss. Hargus retraced his steps to the Bryan's back door. He hadn't been able to stop Bryan from talking. Their whispers may have went unheard by the others, but he heard well enough. He'd have to silence the widow before she got to that deputy. And through the back door, he could hear her softly weeping, and Hargus slipped through the door without a sound. Ellie laid curled on her bed, face buried in her pillow. The love of her life was gone, and the man responsible for his death was about to get away with it. And she knew she needed to stop crying. She must find Jason Conroe. Knowing was one thing. Finding the strength to act was something else altogether. The dark hole that opened in her heart seemed to suck the life from her. And she'd never loved Sam more than at that moment, and she had never been more furious with him. Ellie's tears stopped on her own volition. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. It suddenly felt as though hundreds of bugs were running up and down her spine. A cold flower of black fear blossomed in her belly. Someone was watching her. A rough hand closed over Ellie's mouth. Another seized her waist and lifted her from the bed. Now, listen very carefully. A voice growled in her ear. I'm fighting the urge to snap your neck and be done with this. Hargus applied pressure to Ellie's neck to emphasize his point. A bolt of white-hot pain shot from her neck down her right arm, and Ellie screamed into the palm clamped tightly over her mouth. His fingers shifted and closed on her nose as well. Ellie tried to draw a breath and failed. She struggled to pry his finger and thumb from her nose, but Hargus was just too strong. She had to have air. Panic overrode her senses, and Ellie thrashed wildly to break free. Blackness closed all around her. Would you like to live? The voice asked from a far edge of her returning consciousness, and Ellie nodded. Then be still. And Ellie complied. Hargus released his hold long enough to allow her a few deep breaths. His hand tightened over her mouth once more. It was a struggle to breathe through her nose, but Ellie was glad to just be breathing again. Her body still screamed for air. There's a very slim chance you might live. That chance hinges entirely on your instant and complete obedience. Do you understand? And Ellie nodded again. Wow, 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 wow. Another one. Wow. Absolutely chest-pounding. What a riveting storyline this is, seamlessly woven together in a superb tapestry of horror by my good friend, Jack LaFountain. Of course, guys and girls, if you enjoy Jack's stories, don't forget you can purchase one for yourself over on the Amazon bookstore. And of course, I'll leave a link to that in the description box below. Please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you're an aspiring writer, want to get in touch with myself at the usual email as on screen, which is dmtforustofear@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. I hope everybody's well this week and getting stuck into whatever it is that you do. I hope everybody's doing well this week and getting stuck into whatever it is that you do, whether it's studying or work. And you're trying to keep fit and focused as possible during these testing times. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.